The barrier had stood for 12,000 years. It was not a wall made of stone or metal. It was something far more terrible. A sphere of twisted space surrounded the Sol system, stretching billions of kilometers in every direction. Ships that tried to cross it simply stopped existing, their atoms scattered across dimensions that had no names. The barrier was absolute. Nothing could leave. Nothing could enter. The galaxy called it the quarantine zone. Young species learned about it in their first lessons about the universe. Old species remembered when it was built, though none of them remembered why. The records had been lost or destroyed long ago. All that remained was the warning, repeated in every language across 10,000 worlds. Do not go to Sol. Do not contact the humans. Do not let them out. Ambassador Keth Valen stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Whisper of Stars and stared at the barrier. It shimmered like oil on water, beautiful and deadly. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he tried to comprehend what he was about to do. He was going to cross it. Keth Valen was a scifi, a species known for their careful nature and their love of rules. His people had served the Galactic Concord for 6,000 years, always following protocols, always respecting the old laws. But times were changing. A new generation of leaders had risen across the galaxy, and they were asking questions that their ancestors had been afraid to ask. Why were the humans imprisoned? What had they done? And after 12,000 years, did it even matter anymore? The Concord had debated for decades. Traditionalists argued that the ancient warnings must be respected. Reformists countered that blind obedience to forgotten rules was foolish. In the end, a compromise was reached. One ship would cross the barrier. One ambassador would make contact with humanity and judge whether they still posed a threat. Keth Valen had volunteered. He was not sure why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the strange dreams he had been having lately. Dreams of a blue world covered in water and teeming with life. Perhaps it was simply fate. The ship's captain, a gruff Thessian named Vorn, approached him. Her scales were gray with age, and her voice was rough like gravel. We're ready, Ambassador. The passage codes have been transmitted. The barrier should open a corridor for us. Should? Keth Valen asked. Vorn shrugged her massive shoulders. The codes are 12,000 years old. We've never tested them. For all we know, the barrier will tear us apart like every other ship that tried to cross. That is not encouraging, Captain. I'm not paid to encourage. I'm paid to fly. She turned and walked back to the command center. Strap in. We go in 5 minutes. Keth Valen watched the barrier shimmer and ripple. Somewhere beyond it, humanity waited. They had been alone for 12 millennia, cut off from the rest of the universe. No trade, no communication, no contact of any kind. Every other species in similar circumstances had either gone extinct or fallen into barbarism. What would he find on the other side? The ship hummed as its engines powered up. Keth Valen gripped the railing and whispered a prayer to gods he was not sure he believed in. The barrier opened. It was not dramatic. There was no flash of light, no thunderous sound. The shimmering wall simply parted, creating a tunnel of stable space just wide enough for their vessel. The Whisper of Stars shot forward, and for a terrible moment, Keth Valen felt reality twist around him. Colors that had no names filled his vision. Sounds that should not exist echoed in his ears. Then it was over. The ship emerged on the other side, intact and unharmed. Keth Valen let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Through the observation window, he could see stars he had never seen before, and there, in the distance, a small yellow sun, Sol, the human star, by the ancestors. Captain Vorn whispered over the intercom. Ambassador, you need to see this. Keth Valen hurried to the command center. The main view screen displayed a sensor sweep of the Sol system, and what it showed was impossible. The humans had not gone extinct. They had not fallen into barbarism. They had built an empire. Mars glowed green with vegetation. Massive structures orbited Jupiter, harvesting energy from the gas giant storms. Saturn's rings had been transformed into a network of space stations, each one larger than any city on Thessar Prime. And Earth itself was surrounded by a web of orbital platforms, shipyards, and habitats that sparkled like a crown of jewels. How is this possible? Keth Valen asked. They were isolated. No trade, no resources from outside their system. They should be struggling to survive. Vorn shook her head slowly. I don't know, Ambassador, But they've been busy. A light flashed on the communication panel. Someone was hailing them. The view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. It was a female. Keth Valen guessed. Based on the information in the ancient records, she had dark skin, bright eyes, and hair that was twisted into elaborate patterns. She wore a simple uniform with no markings of rank. Unknown vessel, the human said. You have entered Sol space. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Her voice was calm, not aggressive, but not welcoming either. Keth Valen stepped forward, remembering his diplomatic training. I am Ambassador Keth Valen of the Sarathi Diplomatic Corps, representing the Galactic Concord. I come in peace, with a message of greeting from the peoples of the galaxy. The human stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and there was something strange in that smile, something old and knowing. After 12,000 years, she said, you finally came to say hello. Her name was Director Amara Okonkwo, and she was the head of Earth's External Relations Council. She explained that the council had been created centuries ago. When human scientists first detected the barrier weakening, they had known, somehow, that contact was coming. They had prepared. Director Okonkwo invited Keth Valen and a small team to visit Earth. Captain Vorn objected, warning of possible traps. But Keth Valen insisted. He had not crossed 12,000 years of isolation to stay on his ship. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Keth Valen pressed his face against the window like a child seeing space for the first time. The planet was beautiful beyond words. Blue oceans stretched from horizon to horizon. Green forests covered entire continents. White clouds swirled in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like brushstrokes on a cosmic canvas. But it was the cities that took his breath away. They rose from the landscape like living things, towers of glass and metal and growing plants all woven together. Flying vehicles filled the air, moving in patterns that should have been chaotic but somehow flowed like water. And everywhere, there were humans, millions of them, billions of them, going about their lives with an energy that Keth Valen could feel even from high above. Your world is remarkable, he said. Director Okonkwo sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. We've had time to work on it. 12,000 years of time. How did you survive? The isolation should have destroyed you. Perhaps it would have destroyed other species. She looked out the window, and again Keth Valen saw that strange knowing look in her eyes. But we are very good at surviving, Ambassador. It is what we do. The shuttle landed in a city called New Geneva, built on the shores of a great lake surrounded by mountains. Keth Valen was escorted to a building that served as the headquarters of the External Relations Council. There, he met the other council members and began the long process of diplomatic introduction. The humans were gracious hosts. They answered his questions about their history, their technology, their society. They showed him wonders that surpassed anything in the Concord. Medical science that could cure any disease, energy systems that drew power from the fabric of space itself, art and music and literature that had evolved in complete isolation, developing in directions no other species had ever imagined. But there were also things they would not discuss. Whenever Keth Valen asked about the barrier, the humans changed the subject. When he inquired about the original quarantine, they smiled and offered more food, more entertainment, more distractions. They were hiding something. He was certain of it. On the third day of his visit, Keth Valen attended a memorial service. He had not planned to go. One of his escorts, a young man named David, had mentioned that his grandmother had died recently. The service was being held in a small temple in the old part of the city. David seemed surprised but pleased when Keth Valen asked to attend. The temple was simple and beautiful. Wooden walls, paper screens, a garden of carefully arranged stones. About 50 humans were gathered inside, dressed in white clothes. At the front of the room, there was a photograph of an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair. The ceremony was unlike anything Keth Valen had seen before. There was sadness, yes, tears were shed, but there was also something else, something that felt almost like joy. The speakers told stories about the grandmother, funny stories and touching stories, and the crowd laughed and cried in equal measure. Then something strange happened. An elderly man stood up to speak. He was David's grandfather, Keth Valen learned. He talked about his wife with deep love, describing their life together. But his words took an unusual turn. She told me not to be sad, the old man said. She told me this was not goodbye, just A different kind of hello. She said she would wait for me, and when my time comes, we will walk together again. The crowd nodded as if this was perfectly normal. Some of them smiled through their tears, and Keth Valen felt a chill run down his spine. After the service, he found David standing alone in the garden. The young man was looking up at the sky, his expression peaceful despite his grief. "May I ask you something?" Keth Valen said. David nodded. "Your grandfather spoke of your grandmother as if death was not the end for her, as if she still exists somewhere." David was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face Keth Valen, and his eyes held the same knowing look that Director Okonkwo had shown. "Every species in the galaxy fears death, Ambassador. You see it as the final ending, the great darkness, the void from which nothing returns. Is it not?" David smiled. "My grandmother is not gone. She has simply moved on, to a place where she will wait for those she loves. We do not fear death because we know it is not the end, not for us." "How can you know this?" "Because we remember, Ambassador." David placed a hand over his heart. "All of us remember. Every human who has ever lived. Every human who has ever died. They are still with us, still connected to us. Death is just a door, and we know what waits on the other side." Keth Valen wanted to ask more questions. He wanted to demand explanations, but something in David's voice stopped him. This was not a belief or a faith. This was knowledge. Certainty. The kind of certainty that came from direct experience. The humans knew something about death that no other species knew, and they were not ready to share it. That night, Keth Valen could not sleep. He stood at the window of his guest quarters, looking out at the city lights of New Geneva. The mountains were dark shadows against a sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the barrier, the Concorde waited for his report. What would he tell them? He could report that humanity was not a threat, that they had built a peaceful, advanced civilization during their isolation, that they were ready to rejoin the galactic community as productive members. But that would not be the whole truth. The whole truth was that something was different about humans, something fundamental. They spoke of death like it was a journey rather than an ending. They smiled at funerals. They carried their ancestors with them in a way that seemed more than just memory. The ancient warnings came back to him. The words that had been repeated for 12,000 years. The words whose meaning had been lost to time. Do not contact the humans. Do not let them out. Perhaps the ancients had not feared what humanity would do to the galaxy. Perhaps they had feared what humanity would reveal about the nature of existence itself. Keth Valen turned away from the window and began composing his preliminary report. He would recommend that the barrier be lowered. He would advocate for humanity's admission to the Concorde. The reformists would celebrate, and the traditionalists would grumble, and the galaxy would move forward. But in his private notes, the ones that would never be shared with anyone, he wrote a single question. What do the humans know about death that the rest of us have forgotten? The barrier had stood for 12,000 years. Soon, it would fall, and the galaxy would finally learn what had been hidden behind it all along. The next morning, Director Okonkwo came to see him. She stood in the doorway of his quarters, her hands clasped behind her back. "You have questions," she said. It was not a question. "Many of them. I know." She stepped inside and closed the door. "I can see it in your eyes, Ambassador. You've noticed that we are different, that we treat death differently than other species. Will you explain it to me?" She was silent for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the city, just as he had done the night before. 12,000 years ago, the beings who built the barrier came to Earth. They were ancient even then, older than most stars. They had watched life evolve across the galaxy, and they had noticed something strange about humanity. What did they notice? That we don't end. She turned to face him. "When a scifi dies, Ambassador, what happens to their consciousness?" Keth Valen considered the question. "It disperses, returns to the energy of the universe, ceases to exist as an individual." "Yes, that is what happens to every species in the galaxy. Consciousness is temporary, a brief flame that burns and then goes out." She paused. "But not for humans. When we die, our consciousness does not disperse. It persists, anchored to something beyond normal space and time." Keth Valen felt his heart's beating faster. "You are saying that humans are immortal?" "Not physically. Our bodies die like anyone else's. But the core of what we are, the thing that makes you you and me me, that continues. Forever. How is this possible? We don't know. Perhaps it was an accident of evolution. Perhaps it was deliberately designed by forces we cannot comprehend. All we know is that it is true. Every human who has ever lived still exists, and they are waiting. Waiting for what? Director Okonkwo smiled, and there was something ancient in her eyes. Something that had seen centuries pass like days. For the right moment to return, she left him alone with his thoughts. Kethvalen sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what he had learned. If it was true, if humans truly did persist after death, then everything the galaxy believed about the nature of consciousness was wrong. And if it was true, then the ancient beings who built the barrier had known. They had seen what humanity was, and they had been afraid. Not afraid of what humanity would do to the galaxy, afraid of what humanity would become. Kethvalen looked up at the sky, where the barrier still shimmered at the edge of the solar system. Soon, he would return to the Concord with his report. Soon, the barrier would fall. And soon, humanity would walk among the stars for the first time in 12,000 years. He wondered if the galaxy was ready for what was coming. He suspected it was not. The barrier fell on a Tuesday. Kethvalen watched from the observation deck of Thesar Prime's orbital station as the ancient wall of twisted space simply dissolved. One moment it was there, shimmering and deadly. The next moment it was gone, leaving nothing but empty space and distant stars. 12,000 years of isolation ended with the press of a button. The Galactic Concord had debated for 3 years after his return from Earth. Traditionalists had fought against lowering the barrier, citing the ancient warnings and demanding more investigation. But the reformists had won in the end. Kethvalen's report had described a peaceful species, advanced and cultured, ready to rejoin the galactic community. He had not mentioned the strange things Director Okonkwo had told him about death. Those words remained locked in his private files, unshared and unspoken. Now, watching the barrier disappear, he wondered if he had made a mistake. The first human ships emerged from soul space within hours. They were beautiful vessels, sleek and elegant, designed with an artistic sensibility that put Concord engineering to shame. Commander Yara Chen led the fleet, a woman whose reputation had already spread across the galaxy. She was the granddaughter of the famous Admiral Chen who had united Earth's scattered nations during the dark years of isolation. She carried her ancestors' legacy with quiet pride. Kethvalen had met her briefly during his time on Earth. She was intense and focused, with eyes that seemed to look straight through you. Now she would be the face of humanity as they explored the galaxy for the first time. The Concord had assigned Kethvalen as humanity's official advocate, a role that made him responsible for helping them navigate the complex politics of galactic civilization. It was an honor, they told him, a recognition of his groundbreaking diplomatic work. He knew the truth. They wanted him to watch the humans, to report any signs of the danger that the ancient warnings had spoken of. Commander Chen's fleet traveled slowly through Concord space, stopping at major worlds to establish diplomatic relations. Everywhere they went, crowds gathered to see the legendary humans, the species that had been locked away since before most civilizations were born. Some watched with curiosity, others watched with fear. The humans seemed unbothered by either reaction. They were polite and patient, answering endless questions about their history and culture. They shared their technology freely, offering advances in medicine and energy production that could benefit countless worlds. They asked for nothing in return except friendship. It was almost too perfect, and Kethvalen could not shake the feeling that something was being hidden. He joined Commander Chen's fleet at the trading station of Kresh, a massive structure that orbited a dying red star. The station was neutral ground, where species from across the galaxy came to exchange goods and information. It was also home to the largest archive of ancient records outside of Thesar Prime. Kethvalen had a mission of his own. While the humans conducted their diplomatic business, he would search the archives for information about the original quarantine. Someone must have recorded why Earth was sealed away. Someone must know the truth. The archive was located in the station's lower levels, a vast complex of data storage systems that held records going back millions of years. Most of the information was mundane: trade agreements, star charts, scientific observations, but buried deep in the oldest sections, Kethvalen found fragments of something else. The records were damaged, corrupted by time and neglect, but he managed to piece together a partial history of the quarantine. 12,000 years ago, A species called the architects had ruled the galaxy. They were ancient beyond comprehension, the first intelligent beings to evolve after the birth of the universe. They had created much of what now existed, seeding life on countless worlds, building the foundations of galactic civilization. Then they had encountered humanity. The records were unclear about what happened next. There were references to the anomaly and the temporal anchoring. There were warnings about consciousness that does not end, and memory that persists across death. The architects had been afraid. That much was clear. Afraid enough to build the barrier. Afraid enough to seal humanity away from the rest of the universe. And then the architects had disappeared. Not died. Not left. Disappeared. Every trace of their civilization had been erased, as if they had never existed. Only the barrier remained, along with scattered warnings that no one could fully understand. Keth Valen sat in the dim light of the archive, surrounded by fragments of a story that made no sense. The architects had been the most powerful beings in galactic history. What could they have seen in humanity that frightened them enough to vanish? He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Commander Chen standing in the doorway. She was dressed in a simple uniform, her dark hair pulled back from her face. Her expression was unreadable. "Ambassador," she said, "I thought I might find you here." "Commander," Keth Valen gestured at the screens around him. "I have been researching the origins of the quarantine. And what have you found? Fragments, mysteries, more questions than answers." He paused. "The architects were afraid of your species, Commander. Afraid enough to imprison you and then erase themselves from existence. Do you know why?" Chen walked into the room and sat down across from him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes moved across the screens, reading the fragments of ancient texts that Keth Valen had assembled. "What do you know about consciousness, Ambassador?" she finally asked. "I know that it is the essence of intelligent life, the thing that makes us aware, that allows us to think and feel and experience existence. And what happens to consciousness when you die?" It was the same question Director Okonkwo had asked him 3 years ago. "It disperses, returns to the universe, ceases to exist. That is what happens to you." Chen leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But it is not what happens to us. When a human dies, our consciousness does not disperse. It remains intact, coherent, aware. Director Okonkwo told me something similar, but I still do not understand what it means." "It means that every human who has ever lived still exists, Ambassador, not as ghosts or spirits, not as metaphors or memories, as real, conscious beings, anchored to the fabric of reality itself." She stood up and walked to one of the screens. "The architects discovered this when they first encountered us. They had been studying consciousness for billions of years, trying to understand its nature. And in humanity, they found something that terrified them." "What?" Proof that consciousness can be permanent." She turned to face him. "The architects believed that the universe was dying, that entropy would eventually consume everything, including consciousness itself. They had been searching for a way to preserve awareness, to create beings whose consciousness could survive the death of the universe. And they found you. They found us. An accident of evolution. A species whose consciousness was somehow anchored to the time stream itself, immune to entropy, immune to death." Her voice was soft but certain. "We were exactly what they had been looking for, and it terrified them." "Why would that terrify them? If you were the answer to their search?" "Because we were not supposed to exist." Chen sat down again, and Keth Valen saw weariness in her eyes, the weariness of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "The architects were control freaks, Ambassador. They wanted to create permanent consciousness, yes, but they wanted to create it themselves. They wanted to be the ones who decided who would live forever and who would fade away. And then, they discovered a species that had achieved immortality by accident, without their help, without their permission." Keth Valen began to understand. "They could not control you. No. And worse than that, they realized that if other species learned what we were, it would change everything. Their power was based on being the only ones who understood consciousness. If everyone knew that permanent awareness was possible, that death was not the end, the architects would lose their authority, their relevance. So they locked you away. They locked us away. And then they erased themselves, because they knew that as long as they existed, we would eventually break free and expose the truth." Keth Valen sat in silence, processing this information. The story was almost too large to comprehend, an ancient conspiracy spanning billions of years. A secret so important that the most powerful beings in galactic history had chosen to cease existing, rather than let it be revealed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you have been searching for the truth for 3 years. Because you deserve to know. And because—" She hesitated. "Because something is happening to us, Ambassador. Something that we have been waiting for since the beginning of our species." "What do you mean?" "The dead are waking up." The words hung in the air between them. Keth Valen felt his scales prickle with unease. 3 months ago, Chen continued, humans across the galaxy began experiencing strange dreams. Vivid dreams, unlike anything we had known before. Dreams of ancestors we had never met, speaking to us in voices we had never heard. Dreams of memories that were not our own. Dreams are not unusual. Every species dreams. These are not ordinary dreams. They are communications. Chen's voice was steady, but Keth Valen could hear the fear beneath it. The dead are reaching out to the living. The barrier kept them contained, somehow, kept them separate from us. But now that the barrier is down, the connection is reforming. Connection to what? To everyone who has ever lived and died. 200,000 years of human consciousness, Ambassador. Billions upon billions of minds, all still aware, all still existing in some space beyond normal reality. And they are trying to come back. Keth Valen stood up abruptly. "This is impossible. You are describing the resurrection of every human who has ever died. That cannot happen. I don't know if it will happen. I only know that something is changing." Chen rose to face him. "The architects built the barrier for a reason. They were afraid of what we would become when enough of us had died. When enough consciousness had accumulated in the space where our dead wait. Perhaps they were right to be afraid. What will you do? What we have always done. Survive. Adapt. Face whatever comes." She smiled, and there was no fear in her expression now, only determination. "But I wanted you to know, Ambassador, because when the time comes, the galaxy will need to choose. They can stand with us, or they can stand against us, and I believe you will help them make the right choice." She left him alone in the archive, surrounded by the fragments of ancient history. Keth Valen sat for a long time, thinking about what she had told him. The dead are waking up. He had spent 3 years advocating for humanity, telling the Concord that they were not a threat. Now he was not sure what they were. Not enemies, certainly, but perhaps not simply friends either. Perhaps they were something new, something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. Perhaps they were the next step in the evolution of consciousness itself. Keth Valen gathered his notes and left the archive. The station around him was busy with life, thousands of beings from hundreds of species going about their daily business. None of them knew what was coming. None of them suspected that reality itself might be about to change. He found Commander Chen on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The red giant that the station orbited was swollen and dim, in the final stages of its life. In a few million years, it would collapse and die, taking the station and everything around it with it. "Do you ever wonder," Chen said without turning around, "what the universe will look like when the last star burns out?" "I try not to think about such things. Humans think about it all the time. The heat death of the universe. The end of everything." She turned to face him. "But we don't fear it, because we know that consciousness does not depend on stars or planets or physical matter. Consciousness is something else. Something that can survive even the death of reality itself." That is a comforting thought. It is also a terrifying one. She looked back at the dying star. The architects understood that. They knew that if consciousness could survive the end of the universe, then consciousness was more fundamental than the universe itself. That awareness was not a product of reality, but perhaps the other way around. "You are saying that consciousness creates reality?" "I am saying that no one knows what consciousness truly is. Not the architects, not us, not anyone." She smiled. "But we are going to find out, Ambassador. One way or another, we are going to find out." Keth Valen returned to Thessor Prime a week later. He submitted his reports to the Concord, careful to include only the information that they were ready to hear. The humans were peaceful. The humans were cooperative. The humans posed no threat to galactic civilization. He did not mention the dreams. He did not mention the waking dead. But at night, when he was alone in his quarters, He thought about Commander Chen's words. He thought about the architects and their ancient fear. He thought about 200,000 years of accumulated human consciousness, waiting in some space beyond normal reality, and he wondered what would happen when they finally came back. The barrier had fallen, the waiting was almost over, and the galaxy was not ready for what was coming. Keth Valen stood at his window, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was spreading across the cosmos, reconnecting with the galaxy they had been separated from for so long. They were building relationships, sharing technology, making friends, and somewhere beyond normal space, in a dimension that had no name, billions of human minds were stirring, reaching out, preparing for something that even they did not fully understand. The dreams had started, the connection was reforming, and soon, very soon, the living and the dead would meet again. The dreams came every night now. Commander Yara Chen stood on a shore that did not exist, watching waves of light roll in from an infinite ocean. The sky above her was filled with stars, but they were wrong somehow. Too close, too bright, alive in a way that stars should not be. She was not alone. Figures stood around her, thousands of them stretching along the shore as far as she could see. They were human, but there was something different about them. They glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Their eyes held the weight of centuries. One of them stepped forward, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Chen recognized her from old photographs. "Grandmother?" she whispered. "Hello, little star." The woman smiled, and her voice was exactly as Chen had imagined it would be, warm and gentle and full of love. "I have been waiting a long time to meet you. You died before I was born. 80 years ago. I know. But death is not what you think it is. Not for us." Chen looked at the other figures on the shore. They were watching her with patient expressions, waiting for something. "Who are they?" "Everyone." Her grandmother gestured at the crowd. "Every human who has ever lived and died. We are all here, waiting in this place between moments. Some of us have been waiting for 200,000 years. Waiting for what? For the barrier to fall, for the connection to reform." Her grandmother took her hand, and Chen could feel warmth, real warmth, as if the woman was truly there. For the convergence to begin, Chen woke up gasping. She was in her quarters on the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, 2,000 light-years from Earth. The ship was quiet, the crew asleep, the stars outside her window cold and distant. But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The convergence. She got up and went to the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Park was on night watch, a young man from the Korean peninsula who had joined her crew 3 months ago. He looked up as she entered, surprise on his face. "Commander? Is something wrong?" "The dreams, Park. Are you having them too?" He hesitated, then nodded. "My father. He died when I was 10. But in the dreams, he is there, talking to me, telling me things that no one else could know. Your father is dead, I know. But he is also..." Park struggled for words. "He is also still here. Somewhere. Does that make sense?" It made more sense than Chen wanted to admit. She had read the ancient records that Ambassador Keth Valen had uncovered. She knew what the architects had believed about human consciousness. But believing something and experiencing it were two different things. The dreams felt real. More than real. They felt like truth. The ship's communication system chimed. An incoming message from Earth. Chen opened the channel and found herself looking at Director Okonkwo's face. The older woman looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her hair uncombed. "Commander Chen, I am glad you are awake." "Director, what is happening?" "The dreams are spreading. Every human in the galaxy is experiencing them now. We have received reports from every colony, every outpost, every ship." Okonkwo paused. "The dead are reaching out to us. All of them. All at once. What does it mean? We do not know yet. Our scientists are studying the phenomenon, but they have never seen anything like it." Okonkwo leaned closer to the camera. "I need you to go to Kessa 7th. There is someone there who may have answers." "Who?" "A Vorith elder named Thesana. Her species is one of the oldest in the galaxy, almost as old as the architects themselves. If anyone knows what is happening, it will be her." Chen nodded. "We will change course immediately. Be careful, Commander. The Concord is watching. They have noticed the dreams too, and they are afraid." The connection closed. Chen stood in silence for a moment, thinking about her grandmother on that impossible shore. thinking about all the figures standing with her, patient and waiting. 200,000 years of human dead, all of them still aware, still existing, and now they were reaching out to the living. Kessa the Seventh was a frontier world, barely colonized, covered in vast forests of purple vegetation that reached hundreds of meters into the sky. The Vorith had chosen it as their final home, a quiet place where they could live out their remaining years in peace. There were fewer than 100 Vorith left in the galaxy. They had been a great civilization once, spanning thousands of worlds. Now they were dying. The last of a species that had seen the universe change beyond recognition. Thasana lived in a structure grown from living wood, nestled in the canopy of the tallest tree on the planet. Chen climbed for hours to reach it, following a path of bioluminescent moss that wound through the branches like a glowing road. The elder was waiting for her. Thasana was small by Vorith standards, barely 2 meters tall. Her skin was the color of old copper, covered in patterns that shifted and flowed, like living tattoos. She sat on a platform of woven branches, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. "Commander Yara Chen," she said without opening her eyes. "The granddaughter of Admiral Chen, the great-great-granddaughter of the first human to walk on Mars. You know my lineage. I know many things." The elder opened her eyes, and they were the color of molten gold. "I know why you have come. You want to understand the dreams." "Yes." Thasana gestured for Chen to sit. The platform was surprisingly comfortable, the living wood warm and slightly yielding. "Your species is unique, Commander. We have known this for a long time. Even before the architects built their barrier, we knew." "What did you know?" "That humans do not end." Thasana's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "When a Vorith dies, our consciousness disperses, returns to the energy of the universe. We cease to exist as individuals. This is the way of all things, the way of entropy. But not for humans. No, not for humans." The elder leaned forward. "When a human dies, the consciousness does not disperse. It remains intact, anchored to something outside of normal space and time, something that we do not have words for. The architects knew this. The architects discovered this when they first encountered your species, hundreds of thousands of years ago. They were terrified. They had spent billions of years trying to create permanent consciousness, trying to find a way to survive the death of the universe. And then they found a species that had achieved it by accident." Chen remembered what Director Okonkwo had told her about the architects. "They could not control us. No. And worse than that, they realized that your existence proved something they had been afraid to admit. That consciousness was not just a property of matter, that it was something more fundamental, something that could exist independently of physical reality. I do not understand." Thasana was silent for a moment. Her patterns shifted, forming shapes that seemed almost like words. The architects believed that the universe was dying, that entropy would eventually consume everything. They thought that consciousness was doomed to end when the last star burned out. But humans proved that consciousness could survive death, that it could persist independently of physical bodies, of planets, of stars. So consciousness is not created by the brain. The brain is a receiver, not a generator. It picks up consciousness the way a radio picks up signals. When the radio breaks, the signal does not stop. It continues, waiting for another receiver. Chen felt her heart beating faster. "Are you saying that consciousness exists outside of physical reality?" "I am saying that consciousness is reality." Thasana's eyes blazed with ancient knowledge. "The physical universe is like a dream, Commander. A projection created by consciousness." The architects understood this. They knew that if consciousness could survive the death of the universe, then consciousness was more fundamental than the universe itself. That awareness was not a product of reality, but its source. "That is impossible, is it? Look at your own species. 200,000 years of accumulated consciousness, all of it still existing, all of it still aware. Where do you think they are? Commander, where do you think your dead wait?" "I do not know. They are in the place where reality begins, the space before space, the time before time, the foundation upon which the physical universe is built." Thasana reached out and touched Chen's hand. Her skin was warm, almost hot. "The architects sealed your species away because they were afraid of what would happen when enough consciousness accumulated, when enough of you gathered in that place. What will happen? The convergence." Thasana's voice was barely audible. "The living and the dead will become one. The barrier between physical reality and the realm of consciousness will dissolve, and humanity will become something new, something that has never existed before in the history of the universe. Chen sat in silence, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. It sounded like religion, like mythology. But Thasana spoke with the certainty of someone describing scientific fact. The dreams, Chen said finally. They are part of this convergence? The dreams are the beginning, the first cracks in the wall between worlds. Your dead are reaching out to you, Commander. They are trying to prepare you for what is coming. Can we stop it? No. It was set in motion 200,000 years ago, when the first human died and did not end. Every death since then has added to the accumulation. Every human who has ever lived is now waiting in that other place, adding their consciousness to the whole. Thasana smiled, and there was something ancient and terrible in her expression. The architects tried to stop it by sealing you away. They hoped that isolation would slow the process, but it did not stop. It only delayed, and now that the barrier has fallen, the convergence will complete. What will happen when it completes? Thasana was quiet for a long moment. Her patterns shifted and flowed, forming shapes that Chen could not interpret. I do not know, the elder finally said. No one knows. It has never happened before. A species that does not end. A consciousness that accumulates rather than disperses. You are something new, Commander. Something that the universe has never seen. Are we dangerous? Perhaps. Or perhaps you are the answer to a question that the universe has been asking since the beginning of time. Thasana closed her eyes. The architects were afraid of you, but they were also in awe of you. They knew that you might be the first step in a new evolution of consciousness itself. Chen stood up. Her legs felt unsteady, her mind overwhelmed. Thank you for your wisdom, Elder. There is one more thing. Thasana opened her eyes again. The Concord will try to stop you. They have felt the ripples of your dreams. They know that something is changing, and they are afraid. What should I do? What your species has always done. Survive, adapt, and face whatever comes with courage. The elder smiled. You carry 200,000 years of human consciousness within you, Commander. You are never alone. Remember that. Chen descended from the elder's dwelling as the sun set over Kessa VII. The purple forests glowed in the fading light, bioluminescent plants coming alive as darkness fell. It was beautiful, alien and strange, a world that humanity had never seen until now. She thought about her grandmother, waiting on that impossible shore. She thought about all the humans who had ever lived, accumulated in a place beyond physical reality. She thought about the convergence, the merging of living and dead, the transformation of human consciousness into something new. The dreams would continue, the connection would strengthen, and soon, very soon, humanity would become something that had never existed before. Chen looked up at the stars and wondered if they were ready. She suspected they were not, but ready or not, it was coming. The convergence was coming, and nothing in the universe could stop it now. That night, the dreams came again. Chen stood on the shore of light, surrounded by thousands of figures. Her grandmother was there, and her grandfather, and faces she recognized from history books and old photographs. They were all smiling. It is almost time, her grandmother said. The wall between worlds is thinning. Soon we will be able to return. Return how? Not as we were. As something new. A union of living and dead. A consciousness that spans all of time. Her grandmother took her hand. Do not be afraid, little star. This is what we were meant for. This is why we exist. Chen woke up crying, but for the first time, she was not sure if the tears were from fear or joy. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord was the largest in 1,000 years. Representatives from every member species filled the Great Assembly Hall on Thessar Prime. Their voices echoed off the vaulted ceiling, a cacophony of languages and dialects all expressing the same emotion. Fear. The kind of fear that came from encountering something that defied understanding. High Chancellor Vryn stood at the central podium, her massive form casting a shadow across the assembled delegates. She was a Thessian, one of the oldest species in the Concord, known for their calm wisdom and steady leadership. But today there was nothing calm about her expression. Order, she said, and her voice boomed through the chamber. We will have order. The noise faded slowly. Thousands of eyes turned to the Chancellor, waiting. You all know why we are here. For the past 6 months, reports have been flooding in from every corner of the galaxy. Strange occurrences involving humans. Phenomena that our scientists cannot explain. She activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the podium. A human colony on the edge of Concord space, where residents reported seeing figures that were not there. A trading station where human crew members spoke in languages that had been dead for centuries. A diplomatic vessel, where the human ambassador had conversations with empty air. At first, we believed these were isolated incidents. Mental instability, stress from the transition of rejoining galactic society. The Chancellor's voice was heavy. We were wrong. She changed the display. Now it showed data graphs, energy readings, spatial distortions. Our sensors have detected unusual activity throughout human-populated space. Reality itself seems to be fluctuating. In areas with high human concentration, the laws of physics are behaving inconsistently. Time is moving strangely, and there are signatures of consciousness that our instruments cannot identify. A murmur ran through the assembly. Ambassador Keth Valen sat in the Sarathi delegation, his heart sinking. He had known this moment was coming. He had hoped he would have more time. We have consulted with our oldest records, the Chancellor continued. Records from the time of the architects. And we have found references to something called the temporal anchoring, a phenomenon specific to humans, a condition that makes them. She hesitated. Different from all other species. Different how? Someone called from the crowd. Their consciousness does not end when they die. The assembly erupted. Delegates shouted questions, demands, accusations. Some called the statement impossible. Others demanded proof. A few, the representatives of the oldest species, sat in silence, their expressions grim. The Chancellor raised her hand for quiet. It took several minutes for the chaos to subside. I know how this sounds, but the evidence is clear. Human consciousness persists after physical death. It accumulates in some space outside of normal reality. And now, with the barrier removed, that accumulated consciousness is beginning to interact with the physical world. She turned to face a specific section of the assembly. The human delegation. Commander Yara Chen stood there, flanked by Director Okonkwo and a handful of other human officials. They looked calm, almost serene, despite the hostility radiating from the crowd around them. Commander Chen, the Chancellor said. Do you deny these claims? Chen stepped forward. Her voice was steady when she spoke. I do not deny them. Everything you have said is true. The assembly exploded again. This time, it took even longer to restore order. You admit it? The Chancellor asked. You admit that your species has been concealing this? We have not concealed anything. You never asked. Chen's eyes moved across the assembly, meeting the gazes of delegates who looked at her with fear and anger. For 12,000 years, you kept us locked away. You did not try to understand us. You did not try to communicate with us. You simply decided we were dangerous and built a wall. The architects built that wall. They must have had reasons. They did. They were afraid. Chen walked toward the central podium, and delegates moved aside to let her pass. The architects were afraid of what we represent, not because we would harm them, but because our existence challenged everything they believed about the nature of consciousness. She reached the podium and stood beside the Chancellor, two leaders facing an uncertain future. You want to know what is happening? I will tell you. Every human who has ever lived still exists, not as ghosts or memories, as real, conscious beings, existing in a space beyond physical reality. For 200,000 years, they have been accumulating there. Waiting. Waiting for what? For the convergence. The moment when the living and the dead become one. When humanity transforms into something new. The Chancellor stared at her. And you believe this transformation is imminent? I do not believe it. I know it. Chen touched her chest. I can feel them, Chancellor. My ancestors. My grandmother. Everyone who has ever died. They are reaching out to me, to all of us. The barrier between worlds is thinning. This is madness, someone shouted from the crowd. We cannot allow this to happen. We must restore the barrier. Seal them away again. Others took up the cry. Restore the barrier. Contain the humans. Do not let them contaminate the galaxy. Chen listened to the shouting with a sad expression. Then she raised her hand, and something strange happened. The lights in the chamber flickered. The air grew cold, and for one brief moment, figures appeared behind Chen. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, standing in ranks that stretched into infinity. They were human. but they glowed with inner light. Their eyes held the wisdom of ages. Then they were gone. The assembly sat in stunned silence. "You cannot stop what is happening," Chen said quietly. "No barrier can contain consciousness itself." The architects tried. They failed. And in the end, they chose to erase themselves, rather than face what we would become. The Chancellor found her voice. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" "I am suggesting that you have a choice. You can fight against the inevitable and lose, or you can stand with us and witness the transformation of consciousness itself." Chen turned to face the assembly. "Humanity has never been your enemy. We have been your future. The first step in an evolution that will eventually include all species in the galaxy. You expect us to believe that your dead will save us all? I expect nothing. I only offer the truth." Chen walked back toward the human delegation. "The convergence is coming. Within weeks, perhaps days. When it arrives, every human who has ever lived will unite with every human who is currently alive. We will become a single consciousness spanning all of time. And from that moment forward, nothing will ever be the same." She reached her delegation and turned back to face the assembly one last time. "You can be afraid. You can try to destroy us. But I promise you this. When the convergence is complete, we will remember. We will remember every species that stood against us, and we will remember every species that stood beside us." She paused. "Choose wisely." She sat down. The assembly dissolved into chaos. Keth Valen pushed his way through the crowd after the session ended. He found Chen standing on a balcony overlooking the city, watching ships rise and fall in the evening sky. "That was quite a performance," he said. "It was not a performance. Every word was true. I know. That is what makes it so disturbing." He stood beside her, looking out at the lights of Thessar Prime. "The Concord is terrified. They are talking about rebuilding the barrier, about weapons, about extinction. They will not succeed." "Are you certain?" Chen turned to face him. Her eyes were different than they had been before. Deeper somehow. Older. "Ambassador, I am currently connected to 200,000 years of human consciousness. Billions of minds. All of them aware. All of them part of me. Do you think any weapon the Concord possesses can harm something like that?" Keth Valen felt a chill run through him. "You have already begun. The convergence has already started. It started months ago. It has been accelerating ever since." She smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. "I am no longer just Yara Chen, Ambassador. I am Yara Chen and my grandmother and her grandmother and every human who came before us. We are becoming one. What will happen when the process is complete? We will remember everything. Every moment of human existence, from the first of our kind to the last. Every joy and sorrow. Every triumph and failure. Every thought and dream and hope." Her voice grew soft. "And then we will reach out to the universe and offer the same gift to everyone who wants it. The gift of immortality, the gift of continuity, of memory, of consciousness that does not end." She looked back at the city. "The architects were afraid of us, because they could not control what we represent. But we have never wanted to control anyone. We only want to share." Keth Valen thought about his own mortality, about the dispersion of consciousness that waited for him at the end of his life, the return to entropy that his people had accepted for millions of years. And if someone does not want your gift, then they do not have to accept it. We will not force anyone. Chen reached out and touched his arm. "But I think, when the time comes, you will want to remember, Ambassador. Everyone wants to remember." That night, the Concord Security Council held a secret meeting. Keth Valen was not invited, but he had his sources. By morning, he knew what they had decided. The Concord would attempt to destroy humanity. Not all of it. That would be impossible now, with humans spread across the galaxy. But they would target Earth, the homeworld, the center of the convergence. They believed that if they could destroy Earth and kill enough humans at once, they could disrupt the transformation, stop the convergence before it completed, save the galaxy from whatever humanity was becoming. Keth Valen tried to warn Chen. He sent messages to every human ship and colony he could reach. But the Concord was faster. Within hours, a fleet had assembled, hundreds of warships, drawn from a dozen species, all converging on Sol space. The battle for Earth was about to begin. Keth Valen commandeered a diplomatic vessel and raced toward Sol. He did not know what he could do. He only knew that he had to try. The fleet was already there when he arrived. Ships filled the space around Earth. their weapons charged, their commanders waiting for the order to fire. And on the planet below, something was happening. The sky was filled with light. Not sunlight. Something else. Something that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The light pulsed in patterns that hurt to look at. Patterns that seemed to carry meaning just beyond the edge of comprehension. All ships, prepare to fire. The fleet commander's voice crackled over the communication channel. On my mark. He never finished the sentence. The light exploded outward from Earth, sweeping across the fleet like a wave. Ships that were hit did not explode. They simply stopped. Engines went silent. Weapons went cold. Crew members stood frozen at their stations. And then the figures appeared. They materialized on every bridge, in every corridor, in every chamber. Humans, but not like any humans Keth Valen had seen before. They glowed with inner light. Their eyes held the wisdom of ages. They moved with perfect grace, as if gravity and physics had no hold on them. One of them appeared on Keth Valen's ship, a woman with dark skin and kind eyes. She looked at him and smiled. Do not be afraid, Ambassador. We have not come to harm you. What are you? We are humanity. All of humanity. The living and the dead. United at last. She stepped closer. The convergence is complete. We are one. Keth Valen stared at her. She was beautiful and terrible, a being of pure consciousness wearing a human form. What will you do now? Now, we will show the galaxy what we truly are. Not a threat, not an enemy. She reached out and touched his face, and Keth Valen felt warmth flooding through him. Peace, love, understanding. We are the first step in a new evolution of consciousness, and we want to share that evolution with everyone. She vanished. All over the fleet, the glowing figures were disappearing. But they left something behind. A feeling, a presence, a knowledge that things would never be the same again. Keth Valen looked at Earth, shining with impossible light, and knew that the universe had just changed forever. The light faded slowly. For 3 days, Earth glowed with an impossible radiance that could be seen across the galaxy. Ships that approached the Sol system reported strange phenomena, time moving at different speeds, space bending in ways that defied mathematics, voices speaking in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. And then, on the 4th day, silence. Ambassador Keth Valen's ship drifted in orbit around the transformed Earth, waiting. He had not slept since the convergence began. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, the figures of light, the faces of every human who had ever lived, united into a single consciousness. Ambassador. His communications officer spoke in a hushed voice. We are receiving a transmission from the surface. Put it through. The view screen flickered, and Commander Yara Chen appeared. But she was different now. Her eyes glowed faintly, and there was something behind her expression that had not been there before. A depth, a presence, as if she was looking at him through the eyes of billions. Ambassador Keth Valen, she said. Thank you for staying. I did not know where else to go. She smiled, and there was warmth in the expression. Genuine warmth, untouched by the terrible transformation she had undergone. The convergence is complete. We have become what we were always meant to be. What are you now? We are still human, Ambassador. Every human who has ever lived is still themselves. But we are also more. We are connected, unified, a single consciousness that spans all of time. She paused. Would you like to understand? I'm not sure I can. Let me show you. The view screen went dark. For a moment, Keth Valen thought the transmission had ended. Then he felt something touch his mind. Not physically, not through any technology, a direct contact, consciousness to consciousness, and suddenly, he understood. He saw the history of humanity unfold before him, not as words or images, but as living memory. He felt the first humans walking out of Africa, curious and afraid. He experienced the birth of civilization, the joy of discovery, the tragedy of war. He lived through plagues and famines, through golden ages and dark times, through triumph and defeat. 200,000 years of human existence flowed through him in an instant. Every life, every death, every moment of love and loss and hope, and beneath it all, he felt the thread that connected them, the consciousness that did not end, the awareness that persisted through death, waiting in a space beyond physical reality, waiting for this moment. The vision faded, and Keth Valen found himself gasping for breath. Tears streamed down his face. Though he had not known his species could cry. "Now you understand," Chen said. Her face had returned to the view screen. "We are not monsters, Ambassador. We are not conquerors. We are simply a species that remembers everything." Kethvalen whispered. "You remember everything, every moment, every being, every thought and feeling and experience." She leaned closer. "The universe is vast and ancient, Ambassador. Civilizations rise and fall. Species evolve and go extinct. Stars are born and die. In the end, entropy claims everything. Nothing survives, except you, except consciousness. That is the great secret that the architects discovered and feared. Physical reality is temporary. Matter and energy will eventually fade into nothingness. But consciousness is different. Consciousness can persist, and if enough consciousness gathers together, if enough beings remember each other, you can survive the death of the universe itself." "Yes." Chen smiled, and there was something vast and ancient behind that smile. "That is what we are. That is what humanity has always been. The first species to achieve true immortality. Not through technology or magic, through memory, through the simple act of remembering." Kethvalen sat in silence, processing what he had learned. It was too large to fully comprehend, too profound, but he could feel the truth of it in his bones. "The Concorde fleet," he said finally. "What will you do about them?" "Nothing. We have already done what needed to be done." "I do not understand." "When the convergence completed, we touched every mind in the fleet. Not to harm them, not to control them, simply to show them what we showed you." Chen's expression grew soft. "They understand now. They are no longer afraid." "And the Concorde? The species that ordered the attack? They will learn the truth in time. We are patient. We have been waiting for 200,000 years. We can wait a little longer." Kethvalen thought about the Concorde's reaction to what had happened. The panic, the fear, the desperate attempt to destroy what they could not understand. It all seemed so small now, so pointless. "What happens next?" he asked. "We offer the gift to those who want it." "The gift?" "The gift of continuity, of memory, of consciousness that does not end." Chen stood up from wherever she had been sitting. Her form seemed to shimmer, as if she existed in multiple places at once. "Every species in the galaxy faces the same fate, Ambassador. Death, dissolution, the end of individual consciousness. But it does not have to be that way. You can give immortality to others? Not give. Share. The process is simple. When a being dies, their consciousness can be anchored to the same space where our dead wait. They can join the great accumulation of awareness. They can become part of something larger than themselves while still remaining who they are." Kethvalen's hearts raced. "You are offering to share this with the entire galaxy?" "We are offering to share it with anyone who wants it. No conditions, no price. Simply the opportunity to continue existing after physical death." Chen's eyes met his through the screen. "The universe is dying, Ambassador. In trillions of years, the last star will burn out. The last planet will crumble to dust. But consciousness can survive. Memory can endure. And if enough beings join together, if enough awareness accumulates in that space beyond physical reality, you believe that consciousness can survive the death of the universe. We know it can. That is why the architects were so afraid of us. They understood the implications of what we represented. If consciousness can persist independently of physical reality, then consciousness is more fundamental than the universe itself, which means that when the physical universe ends, consciousness will still exist. And if enough consciousness gathers together, it can create a new reality, a new universe, a new beginning. Kethvalen felt dizzy. The scale of what she was describing was beyond comprehension. The death and rebirth of universes, the eternal persistence of awareness, a cycle that had been repeating since before time began. You believe consciousness creates reality? We have seen it, Ambassador. In the space where our dead wait, we have access to knowledge that physical beings cannot perceive. We have seen the birth of this universe. We have seen what came before it, and we know what will come after. Chen smiled, and there was something almost playful in her expression. The architects were not the first advanced civilization. They were not even the 100th. Consciousness has been evolving across countless universes, each one giving rise to beings that remember, that persist, that eventually learn to create new realities when the old ones fade. And humanity is the next step in that evolution. The first species in this universe to achieve true immortality, the first to begin the accumulation that will eventually lead to the creation of the next universe. She paused. But we do not want to do it alone. We want to share it with everyone. Keth Valen sat in silence for a long time. Outside his window, Earth glowed softly, a world transformed by the union of living and dead. Somewhere below, billions of humans existed in a state that no other species had ever achieved, and somewhere beyond normal space, 200,000 years of accumulated consciousness waited, patient and eternal. I need to report to the Concord, he finally said. We know. Take your time. We are not going anywhere. Chen's image flickered. But before you go, Ambassador, I want you to know something. What? Your grandmother. The one who died when you were young. The one whose memory you have carried all these years. Chen's voice was gentle. She is not gone. She dispersed when she died, as all non-humans do. But the pattern of her consciousness, the essence of who she was, left traces, imprints on the fabric of reality. Keth Valen felt tears rising again. What are you saying? We can find those traces, gather them, reconstruct what was lost. Chen leaned forward. If you want, Ambassador, we can give your grandmother back to you. Not as she was, but as something new. A consciousness that remembers what she remembered, that loves what she loved. He could not speak. The offer was too vast, too incredible, too painful to contemplate. Think about it, Chen said kindly. There is no rush. We have all the time in the universe. The transmission ended. Keth Valen sat alone in the darkness, thinking about everything he had learned. About humanity and consciousness and the nature of reality itself. About his grandmother, who had died so long ago. About the offer that Chen had made, the gift of memory, the gift of continuity, the gift of knowing that nothing was ever truly lost. 1 week later, Keth Valen stood before the Galactic Concord. The assembly hall was silent as he spoke. No interruptions, no shouts of disbelief. The delegates simply listened, their expressions ranging from wonder to terror to hope. He told them everything. About the convergence, about the nature of human consciousness, about the space beyond physical reality where the dead waited, about the offer that humanity was making to the galaxy. When he finished, the High Chancellor rose from her podium. You are asking us to believe that death is not the end, that consciousness can survive indefinitely, that humanity is offering to share this gift with all species. I am not asking you to believe anything, Chancellor. I am simply reporting what I have witnessed, what I have felt. Keth Valen touched his chest. They showed me their history, every moment of human existence. Flowing through my mind in an instant, I felt the truth of what they are, and I believe them. Even if this is true, how can we trust them? They were locked away for 12,000 years. We tried to destroy them. Why would they help us? Because that is what they do. Keth Valen smiled, remembering the warmth that had flooded through him when Chen touched his mind. Humanity has always been defined by one thing above all others, not their intelligence or their creativity or their ambition, their memory. They remember everything. They carry their ancestors with them always, and they refuse to let anyone be forgotten. That is a pretty sentiment, Ambassador. But sentiment does not build civilizations. No, but it might save them. He looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of delegates from every corner of the galaxy. The universe is dying. We all know this. In time, entropy will claim everything. Every world, every species, every memory of what once existed. Unless we find a way to survive. And you believe humanity is that way? I believe humanity is a beginning. A first step on a journey that could lead to the salvation of consciousness itself. He paused. They are not asking us to worship them or serve them. They are asking us to join them, to become part of something larger than ourselves, to help build a future where nothing is ever truly lost. The assembly sat in silence. Finally, a delegate stood, a young Thessian, barely old enough to hold her position. If I accept this gift, she said, what happens when I die? Your consciousness will persist. It will join the great accumulation of awareness that humanity has gathered. You will still be you, but you will also be connected to something vast and ancient and eternal. Will I remember? You will remember everything. The young Thessian looked around at her fellow delegates. Then she nodded slowly. Then I accept. Others rose. Some immediately, some after hesitation. One by one, delegates from across the galaxy stood and declared their acceptance. Not all of them. Some remained seated, their faces closed and fearful. But enough stood that Kethvalen knew the tide had turned. The Concord would not fight humanity. The galaxy would join them. 6 months later, Kethvalen stood on a balcony in New Geneva, watching the sun set over the mountains. Earth had changed in the time since the convergence. The air seemed cleaner, the colors brighter, and everywhere, there was a sense of peace that had not existed before. Commander Chen stood beside him. She looked the same as she always had, but her eyes held depths that no mortal could match. The first non-human consciousnesses have been anchored, she said. A Thessian scientist who died last week. A Sarathi elder who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. They are with us now, in the space beyond reality. How does it feel? Having alien minds join your collective? Different? Wonderful. Chen smiled. We have been alone for so long, Ambassador. Just humans, waiting and watching. Now we are beginning to become something more. A community of consciousness that spans species and time. Kethvalen thought about his grandmother. He had not yet asked Chen to reconstruct her. He was not sure if he was ready. What comes next? He asked. We grow. We gather. We accumulate more consciousness, more memory, more awareness. Chen looked at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. In time, we will become something that this universe has never seen. A collective awareness, vast enough to survive the death of reality itself. And when the last star burns out, when the last atom decays, we will still be here, remembering, persisting, and then we will create something new, a new universe, a new reality, born from the accumulated memory of everyone who ever lived. She turned to face him. That is the gift we offer, Ambassador. Not just survival, but the chance to be part of the next creation, to help build whatever comes after this universe ends. Kethvalen looked at the stars, each one a sun, orbited by worlds where beings lived and dreamed and died. Beings who had always feared the darkness that waited at the end of existence. Beings who now had a chance at something more. The architects were afraid of you, he said quietly. The architects wanted to be gods. They wanted to control the next creation themselves. They could not accept that it might be shared. Chen touched his arm. We are not gods, Ambassador. We are just a species that refuses to forget. And we want everyone to share in the memory. Even those who tried to destroy you, especially them. Anger fades, fear fades, but memory endures. She smiled. 1,000,000 years from now, no one will remember the Concord's attack on Earth, but they will remember that humanity chose to forgive, that we offered the gift to everyone, even our enemies. Kethvalen felt tears on his face. He did not try to hide them. My grandmother, he said. You offered to reconstruct her. The offer still stands. I want. He paused, struggling with emotions that his species did not have words for. I want to see her again. I want to remember her with me, not just as a memory in my mind. Is that selfish? It is human. Chen squeezed his arm. That is the whole point, Ambassador. We are all human now. Every species that joins us becomes part of what we are. And what we are is a family that never lets anyone be forgotten. She led him inside, to a room filled with soft light and gentle sounds. There, waiting for him, was his grandmother. Not as she had been in life. Something different. Something new, but her eyes held the same love he remembered from his childhood. Hello, little one, she said. Kethvalen fell into her arms and wept, and somewhere beyond space and time, in the realm where consciousness waited, 200,000 years of human memory welcomed their newest family member. The barrier had stood for 12,000 years. Now it was gone forever. And in its place, something new was rising. A community of awareness that spanned species and time. A collective memory that would outlast the stars themselves. A promise kept across ages. Nothing that is remembered can ever truly die. And humanity remembers everything. This was the secret they had never revealed. This was the gift they had always been meant to share. This was the beginning of forever.